Separating the data from the noise takes robust metrics. I'm Tanya Hall for ZDNet and Tech Republic, and joining me is Bonnie Barrio, Data Science Manager at LinkedIn. Welcome, Bonnie.
Hi, Tanya. Thanks so much for having me. It's good to be here.
Most people know what LinkedIn is. What do you do there as a data science manager?
Sure. So my team of analytics is responsible for partnering with the content experience product team and being the voice of data throughout the whole product lifecycle. So the content experience team is responsible for the posting of status updates and people writing long-form articles on our platform, as well as the feed of posts that you see when you open the LinkedIn mobile app or you visit linkedin.com. So as the voice of data throughout the product lifecycle, we partner with the product teams to do analysis to guide long-term strategy or to understand what's working well, what we may need to iterate on in the product. And we also do a lot of experimentation as we're rolling out new features or new products to understand how well they're working and are they actually giving us the world we want to build for our members.
You know, to segue off of that, how do you know if the data is giving you a good signal to make a product decision? How do you filter out the noise?
Sure. So actually, one of the hardest parts of this process is defining metrics to tell us whether we are achieving the strategy that we are trying to get to. And the first step there is having a strong strategy and a strong product vision. So we start with the product strategy and then define metrics to help us know whether we're getting there. So if you don't have a strong strategy, you'll never know if you're getting there.
You just spoke on the topic of perverse incentives and metrics. Explain what a perverse incentive is and how do you identify and combat them?
So a perverse incentive is anytime that we define a metric to try to achieve some positive goal, but what we find is that it actually incentivizes totally the wrong behavior that ends up taking us in exactly the opposite direction. So this is not just a modern tech world thing. It's actually been happening throughout history. One of the first sort of defining examples of perverse incentives was well over 100 years ago in French colonial Hanoi. So there were a rat control problem, and the city tried to incentivize people to kill off the rats by paying the residents by the tail for bringing in rat tails. So they hoped everyone would go out and kill the rats. But actually, people ended up farming the rats to collect the reward. And so this incentive of payment for rat tails led to a larger rat population than there was to begin with. So this is kind of the core of the perverse incentive. It's trying to incentivize anything and finding that you are going in completely the wrong direction, even though the metric is going up. So by the definition that you've defined, you should be improving the world.
You say that in analytics, you specialize in asking the right questions in addition to answering them. What's the secret to designing the right question?
I think it always starts with talking to our users and understanding what they want. So we could go in a room and build a great product, but if it's not what people want, then that's totally the wrong direction. So we really try to collect data of all different sizes to use, and we often start with small qualitative data. So my specialty is the big data, log data, metrics, but actually I work closely with our user experience research team who talk to members about what they want. And that's really where we start with anything that we're trying to build. What do our members want?
With terabytes of data everywhere and analytic platforms becoming more accessible, what use is human intuition?
Oh, we definitely love human intuition still, and I think we always will. So the robots are smarter and smarter, but they will never replace human intuition. I think the two cases where we really need intuition are the one, when we don't have data, then we can always fall back on intuition. And then two, when we do have data, we need to keep humans in the loop to understand whether the metric or measurement is actually well correlated to the underlying belief or behavior that we are trying to measure.
What are the tools of the analytic trade? Are there shrink wrapped applications, or do you use custom design tools?
Most of the tools that we use at LinkedIn are built in-house, but based on open source solutions. So we have a metrics pipeline that flows into our dashboarding and A/B testing tools and anomaly detection and things like that. And all of that pipeline and tools are built in-house just because our data is so big and our needs are so custom. But under the hood, there's a lot of open source technologies in there. So we use Hadoop and HDFS and for our data, and then the languages that we're querying it with are things like Presto and Spark that are all open source.
Tell us about True North and signpost metrics. How do they help data scientists answer questions?
Sure. There's always a suite of metrics that we try to think about to measure our strategy. And to that list, I would actually add the idea of guardrail metrics. So we think of True North, signpost, guardrail, and sometimes it's a little nebulous which one's falling where, but the idea is to have one True North metric that tells you, that personifies the strategy where we are trying to go, and then supporting that True North with a suite of signpost metrics that measure shorter term or easier to measure sorts of incremental steps in that process. And then finally, going back to the perverse incentives we were talking about before, sometimes there are these known unknowns, so ways that we expect things will go off the rails, and we can use guardrail metrics that we define to capture those things and make sure that we address them promptly. So something like member complaints or members flagging posts would be an example of a guardrail metric where it's a very sparse signal, but if we start to see it happening, we know we've done something terribly wrong.
You have quite the diverse background, a PhD in chemical engineering and postdoctoral work studying the function of genes in cancer and stem cells. How has this training helped you to use data to guide product strategy?
I think although there's been a diverse selection of fields in my background, actually a lot of the ways that we address problems, define problems, and decide how to solve them is common to a lot of different fields. So I've worked with a lot of data scientists who come from all kinds of different quantitative backgrounds, and I think generalized problem solving is the thing that we have in common, that we have these problems that are so ill-defined that may not have good solutions. And so finding the path from the data that we have, from what is measurable to as close as we can get to the problem we really want to solve, is the common thread that links all of that stuff together.
Bonnie Barrio, shedding some light on what it's like to be a data science manager at LinkedIn. If somebody wants to connect with you, how can they go about doing that?
So definitely send me a message on LinkedIn, of course. You know I love it.
Of course, makes sense. Thanks so much, Bonnie. And if you guys want to find more of my interviews, you can do that right here on ZDNet or Tech Republic, or maybe find me on LinkedIn or go to my website, tanyahall.net. I've got links to all my social sites. Thanks for watching.